everybody to the Sanford School, to this '04 classroom. This is the classroom where like everything starts when you are a public policy major. Duke and I have taught in this classroom endless times, and so it's a place of open discussion and learning, and I hope we can have such a conversation here together today. I do plan to not monopolize the time with the panelists very long and to open it up, and so we can have more of a conversation amongst ourselves. But let's just get to know each other a little bit better. So if I can start with you, Stelfanie, and we can go down the row here just to reflect a little bit on how you got into your career, into your field. What was your sort of career path? And if you want to, feel free to reflect on how gender may have played out in your career for you.
Sure, and thank you, Judith. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I remember this classroom, and I remember my first arrival at Duke. I actually wanted to be a journalism major, but I was very decided about coming to Duke, and so I was guided into public policy, which turned out to be a great decision in terms of the professional journey that I followed. As I was thinking about what the next steps would be after graduation, I was here at Duke for 3 years. That third year, I'm looking for a job, and happened to be over on Central Campus. They used to have the computer labs, and I was looking and thinking, I'd done some work in public health as a college student. I had worked with the schools, and I saw a job that was all about teaching folks to read, and it really resonated with me because when I was 15, I learned that my own grandfather couldn't read, and so I thought, this is the job for me. And it happened to be in the community where I was going to be residing with my new husband, and got the job and began to work with adults who were learning to read and who were oh so wise. And that really began the trajectory for me of working in community colleges, and moved through faculty roles after getting a master's degree, and then ultimately a doctorate degree, and then into administration. Mm-hmm. And along the journey, I guess, as I was on the faculty side and teaching, I think there were gender issues that arose, but it really wasn't until I got into the presidency where I saw the intersections of race and gender, because when I became a community college president, I was, at the time, the youngest in the history of the system, but I was also the only black female college president in North Carolina outside of a historically black college. Mm-hmm. And so with that came an enormous sense of responsibility, but also, I think, certain sensibilities that helped me as an administrator.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
It's funny how things don't work out the way that you always plan them. I ended up getting a job working in political campaigns and technology, which seemed like a fun thing to do for a couple of years. And then 11 years later, I found that I had found something I was passionate about and really enjoyed, which was how to bring together technology in the fast-paced environment of political campaigns and improve on what my customers at that time were doing. So that's where I started and spent quite a few years doing that. But was ready for something new. And I'll actually interject the gender piece here because it was part of why I started looking for something a little bit different. I felt like I'd reached a cap at the company I was working at the time, and I wasn't sure how to get any further along. And I remember a moment when I really started looking for a new job was when I came into the office one day and all of my sort of peers and superiors weren't around. I couldn't find them. And I went to the head of HR, who was also a woman, and asked her where they went and, where is everybody? And she said, well, they went on a leadership retreat fishing in Mississippi. And I was the same rank as several of them. And I had not been invited to this leadership retreat. And I was furious. And when they came back, I sat down with the CEO and he goes, I heard you're gonna give me an earful, just sort of dismissive. And we had this conversation where I expressed the reason it was a problem, and he was saying things like, well, you can take a couple days off. Maybe you and Cheryl can go to the spa. And I was just like, you're not hearing what's wrong with this. I missed this opportunity that you all had together to talk about issues impacting our company, to bond, to grow, I was absent from that because it wasn't considered a feminine thing to go, fishing in the Gulf. So that for me was a little bit of a turning point and an eye-opening moment that even though I had experienced growth at this company and been treated very well, I still felt like, this was a blind spot for them, but also for me, maybe time look for something a little different. I was very fortunate then to find a great opportunity at Microsoft. This was about 5.5 years ago, where at the time I was focused on political campaigns and technology, similar work to what I'd been doing before. You all may be familiar with 2016, where the conversations I was having went from big data and data visualization and machine learning and AI and all these things I was really excited to talk about to, okay, do you know what two-factor authentication is and do you have it on your accounts? And let's talk about password security. And so I got a very quick dose of being a security professional at that time. And then in the years since, my job has actually transitioned to cybersecurity around political institutions. So not just campaigns, so that's part of what we work on as well, but also elections themselves, securing elections here in the US and globally, and then the real broad challenge of disinformation. And so it's been quite a journey, but really am passionate and love what I do now.
Thank you so much, Ginny, Tameeka.
So I'm sure a lot of people can, sympathize with what I'm about to say. So I feel like growing up, I was always pushed to study really hard and get into a really good college. And so, everything around my kind of elementary school experience centered around that. My middle school experience, academic programs, internships, get into that good school, got into that great school. And I loved my time at Duke. I majored in political science and African American studies. Was very interested in diversity identity. At the time, they actually had a focus program my freshman year called Diversity Identity, where you learned about constructions of race and some of the political issues that come with that. But when I reached senior year, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I had friends that were going left and right, going to different interviews, and I just was like, oh my goodness, like deer in the headlights kind of situation. And so what I realized was that I was pushing myself so hard up to that moment from elementary school through college that I actually needed a kind of break. But the type A personality and driver that I am would not allow myself to take that break. So as an interesting compromise, I decided to join Teach for America. Mainly because, yes, I thought that, I really, really loved the mission of Teach for America and what it stood for fighting educational inequity. But I also thought that it would allow me that time to kind of quiet the thoughts in my head and figure out, okay, what do I want to do next? And so I asked to get placed in Durham, which they placed me in Durham, and I taught Spanish here for 3 years, middle school, fun times. And I was all set. I'm originally from New York, and I was all set to move back. And then I met my then husband, and he convinced me to stay. But I was like, oh, well, then I have to find a job. And so what I ended up doing was I worked for a friend who owned an education company. And what I realized for that job was that I was managing all of the tutoring programs that we had in North Carolina. And so I was traveling throughout the state, training teachers, designing curriculum. But I realized that I had a passion for education and learning, and also program management. But at the same time, I was always interested in global affairs, international development, but I didn't really know what that meant, like what kind of job that would fit me in that area. And so I decided to go back to school to make a career shift into international development and went to Sanford. And through Sanford, I realized that there was an actual way to kind of combine an interest in international development with what I realized was a skill in project management. And so after that, I was fortunate to get a job at RTI. Actually, I applied for a job at RTI, did not get it.
People know what RTI is.
Sorry, RTI International. So RTI International is based in the Triangle area here, Research Triangle Park, and we are a research firm at its core, and we span from domestic research all the way through international development. And so that's kind of the pathway that I went, but it was just interesting that through all of different experiences, I was able to really start to hone in on what interests me. But what was key was that I actually needed to take that time to kind of like step back. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of times we don't do that. We just kind of like push ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Thank you to all three of you. I'm going to ask you a question about sort of what's the best and the worst piece of advice you've ever gotten. But immediately after I do that, because I want to engage you guys out in the audience. If there's anybody else in the audience who has particular pieces of good or bad advice they've gotten, I'll do a check out here. We won't go through everybody in the room, but if there's somebody who's like, there's a particular terrible piece of advice or good piece of advice. Stelfanie.
So what immediately jumped to my mind is the worst piece of advice I got.
Yeah.
From a CEO, I was, in my early 20s, teaching, starting a family. I went to my direct supervisor and inquired about FMLA. She said to me, well, I don't make the decision. And I said, well, can I go talk to the decision maker? And I went in, and I remember so clearly when he said, well, you have a gentleman's family now, so that should be enough. Well, I didn't even know what a gentleman's family was at that moment. Later I figured out it was, I guess, having a son and a daughter. And, but that should be enough. And the power dynamics that were at play in that situation when I'm asking to have family medical leave, I guess he thought it was advice. and of course, I was hurt, offended.
Sorry, I'm blown away right now. Sorry.
Yeah, confused, and not really knowing how to deal with that at that point in my career. Looking back on it, I can see all of the ways I could have possibly addressed that. But for me, what I did was take that, and as I became a manager and a leader, and really thinking about the experiences that the whole person brings into the workplace, and trying to really value all those differences and how they make up the team, rather than making folks fit into the fishing trip or whatever the box is for that particular organization. But I went on to have another child who's fantastic.
Yeah.
Four,
Worst
just to
advice.
show them. We're just gonna have one more to really horrify you. I'm gonna flip it a little bit and say there was a time when I gave really bad advice, and realized it and made up for it. But I had a young woman working for me who had a child, and her husband had an opportunity, and she wanted to know if they could move to another state and work remotely. And this young woman had so much potential, and I saw the future of our company in her, and I told her I thought it was a bad idea, because I told her I thought it would limit her possibilities at the company and in her career if she was working remotely, working from home. And I felt really strongly for her. I thought I was coming from the right place. I felt really strongly that she shouldn't do this and that it would be career limiting, and I had so many high expectations for her. But she pushed me to think about it, so I said I'd think about it. And I think I talked to some friends, and I had this sort of moment where I realized I wanted her to have the career I had. I wanted her to do it the way that I did it. I was in the office every day. I was doing the FaceTime. I was networking. That's how I built my career. But we didn't have the same skill set. We weren't the same person. And she was so good at what she did, and I knew that she would feel more of an obligation to be present because she was remote, that she'd probably even excel. And so I came back and I told her I changed my mind, and that if she wanted to do it, I would advocate for her. And I pushed for it with our leadership, and she moved, and she was Employee of the Year next year, literally got the award. Worked her butt off and is still excelling and doing extremely well. And it was for me just a total moment of, wow, I'm trying to make this woman do things the way I do it. We weren't that far apart in age, but I realized that it is different now, like things that were changing. So that was bad advice I gave, but fortunately I caught myself before it was too late.
It's about the value of reflection. I don't know about the rest of you, but as I've taken on the deanship, I found that the need to take that time to reflect on how I conducted myself and to go back and fix it if I feel like I just did that today with somebody, and we're all so busy, but finding that time to stop and say, whoa, wait a minute, maybe that was not optimal what I just did. Yeah, appreciate you sharing a weak moment of your own.
Sure.
Yeah, Tameeka.
So, I don't know, well, I took it as advice, but at the time it wasn't as if he was giving me that advice. So my husband has a saying something that he says a lot, and he says, God gave you 2 ears and 2 eyes and 1 mouth so that you can listen and see twice as much as you speak. And what I've kind of come and learned that means and how it reflects in my life, particularly my work environment, is that yes, we all have a lot that we can share, we can give, we can say, but do we actually take those moments to actually reflect or to listen to what is being said and what's not being said? I think I love RTI. RTI is great, but we are a research organization, which means that we have an incredible amount of smart people. We also have an incredible amount of people who know that they are smart people. And so, yes.
I can't relate.
Oh, no, not at all.
And so, yes, we'll all come to a meeting. We'll all have our ideas, and we'll be just talking. But if we're not listening, if we're not taking that step back, then we're not going anywhere productive. Likewise, a lot of what I do when I travel to my projects is that, yes, sometimes I'm there to support, I'm there to train, I'm there to work with the team. But by working with the team, I actually take a step back and spend a lot of time listening to them, observing them, and then from there I'm able to actually feed off of their cues, and I find that my work has been so much more enriching because of it.
Those tie together nicely. Stelfanie, you reminded me in the family planning department of the worst piece of advice I ever got, which was I was a PhD student at the Kennedy School, and it was a reception like the one we'll be going to afterwards. We're standing at these, tables where you stand and chat. And my dissertation advisor, I told him that I was pregnant, and he said, "Well, that's wonderful because you can spend time thinking about your dissertation while you're changing diapers." And in the next 3 years, I changed a lot of diapers, and I have to say I never had a dissertation breakthrough while changing diapers.
What breakthrough?
That definitely was not a good piece of advice. So people out in the audience, I said I would throw it out there. So is anybody brave enough to share a little bit? Anybody who got a good or a bad piece of advice? Terry.
I just want to comment on Ginny's point, because that I went through a very similar forced mind shift about how I think about other women in my workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe it's a generational thing. It looks like you're a good deal younger than I am, but I'm a baby boomer, and we're all about FaceTime, right? You read the sort of stereotypical descriptions of generations, right? But it really, I really landed at a place where I like to think that I can accept the choice that any woman makes with her career. It used to really bother me when I'm a lawyer at a big law firm. It used to really bother me when young women would opt out of the big law firm track and just go home and raise a family, or go into public interest work, or do something that I viewed as being sort of a cop-out. And it took a lot of time for me to come to the realization that each woman's path is different, and I always support everyone in making their choices instead of trying to get everyone to make the same choice I do.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that the literature has really brought on, or help us understand, as we've started to look at how women might get discriminated against in the workplace, is that half of the time the women are the problem as well, right? Yeah. We as women also put each other in boxes, and yeah. Anne.
I'll throw one out there. I am also a lawyer and chief legal officer for a company, and have a bunch of lawyers working for me. One of them who was obviously wrong in complaining about my being a control freak. Putting aside that she was wrong. My boss said to me, and I really appreciated this, because we know why you have a hard time managing her. So you know how to do her job better than she does. You think she's going to screw something up, and it's going to reflect poorly on you. She might, and it will, get over it. Let go some and let her do her job the way she needs to do her job and know that she's going to do it well.
Oh, I needed to hear that, Anne. Oh, I do that so much. People, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I just did that like less than 30 minutes ago. I walked into somebody who reports to me and said, "Where's that?" Instead of just, you know, I do it too much.
What I struggle with related to that is projecting expectations onto others. So in a way that, yeah, but I did X, Y, and Z, so I don't understand why you're asking to take off because of this, or something like that. And so it's like literally it's a daily kind of check in my head, like, okay, you're judging, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a difficult one
I think
too.
that's a jealousy part too. It's like I wish I'd made some of the decisions that younger people were.
But I think it's our role. I think what we instinctively want to do is have them jump over the same hurdles we jumped over, instead of realizing we're now in a position to push the hurdles down for them. Do you know what I mean? And like that's when you have to. It's not just like accept what the decisions they're making. It's also help them make it easier on them, right? Like don't expect them to have it hard just because you had it hard.
But I see your point too, like, and because sometimes it is like, well, we just lived with it. We just accepted it, right? And yeah.
And for me, I think in terms of evaluating women or men that have worked for me, it really is a mindset from evaluating inputs to evaluating sort of outcomes and the value that folks are offering in terms of the performance. But I was not evaluated early in my career on outcomes. I was evaluated on inputs. And so I've had to change that thinking.
Yeah.
I was going to just share some helpful advice and support
Yes.
that I received about mid-career. I was actually enrolled in an executive MBA program here at Fuqua, and it's a lockstep program, and you have to be able to make the next residence trip, or you're not going to be able to carry on with that particular class. And I was coming up to the next step, and I was concerned about how I was going to be absent from work for 3 weeks to go do this trip to China and Hong Kong for 2 weeks. And I just looked around, and thought, everyone around me, we are all working such long hours, we carry so much, I can't possibly ask my coworkers to cover for me, and there's no way that the work cannot be done while I'm gone. So I was preparing myself to miss out again, and I had already watched back one class, same reason, and so another woman who worked in the office kind of saw me struggling with this, and she said to me, and she was angry, she said, you know, and she made me one of the men in the office, she said, you know, if he wanted to do this, there would be no question about this. He would never hesitate to ask. She said, I'll cover some of your stuff, and so will cover some of your stuff. And if I have to, I'm tired of seeing women hold back from even requesting these kinds of things for themselves, and if I have to write you a script to go in there and talk to Bob, who's their boss, then you're going to do it. And so, okay, you know, and so, that gave me the courage to go and do it, and sure enough, Bob was happy to let me go do it, was a believer in education and supported that, and my coworkers gladly took on the extra load for me, and they got me through a critical phase, and I was able to figure out how to complete the rest of the program. For speaking up, that way.
That's a wonderful story, not just of advice, but advice with substance behind it too, right? Willingness to help at the same time. Yeah. Sarah.
So I have one that's maybe advice that was for someone else that impacted me, and also advice I got too late, which is I had hired some female researchers, and I went in and I initially gave them a slightly lower salary offer than I was prepared to pay, because I figured that they would negotiate, and they didn't at all, and they just accepted it. And I found out later that one of our collaborators had advised one of the women, I didn't know about the other, and he was a male, to just take it. And so, that's one bad piece of it that should advise when you should always negotiate. And then I also just said, okay, well now I'm stuck. They took this lower level, and as a manager, that's great for me. So I have to go with it, I guess. And then later I got advice like, from another woman who had something similar happen, and she said, no, you should tell them, negotiate. Don't tell them what to negotiate for, but just like, if you're trying to lift up another woman, tell her to negotiate. So it's sort of like bad advice for this other woman, and then sort of like too late advice.
Well, okay, I'm gonna back to our panelists with another question, but you know, guys, we might open up again. But so you know, there's the ever present women can't have it all mantra, or people say, well, they can't have it all, but they got to have one thing first and then get the other one later. And I wonder what the experience has been of our panelists in terms of sort of work-life balance and having it all, ambition, and how you managed to work that in your life. Tameeka, do you want to start this time?
Sure. So my daughter Giovanna is known as a Sanford baby because I found out I was pregnant the same week I got my graduate school acceptance letters. And so sitting there, just like, what does this mean? What to do? And so I remember that I randomly received a phone call, and it was my mother in New York and my grandmother who was in Guyana, which is where my family was originally from, and they decided to call me. And they said, you know, we heard the awesome news, we're super excited, and here's what we're going to do. You're going to school, and your grandmother's going to move to North Carolina, and she is going to help you and your husband, and we're gonna make this work because this is what you have to do. And I know that I was in an awesome position with that, but also what was interesting was that I used part of that to help evaluate which schools I was actually going to go to. And what made me decide to go to Sanford was they had them at a student stay, and I came and then I met with various people, and then I said, so I'm pregnant. What would that mean if I enrolled at Sanford? She said, okay, so when are you due? And I gave November. Yes, that would be first semester, right before finals. So this is what it's going to mean for you. And they basically laid out like a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and then plan do whatever you want to do kind of thing. And that immediately lifted the weight off of my shoulders. And so I tend to push myself really hard. And so I guess, I don't know if I really fall on either camp per se. I do feel that you can have it all, but I do feel that you should not feel as if you need to shoulder the burden by yourself. It's okay to ask for help. It's not a sign for weakness or anything like that. I remember I went into labor about a couple hours after I was working on a problem set here. So I blame statistics for all of that, right? And I'm in the hospital, and I wasn't in active labor, so don't be horrified. But I'm still sending emails, and I'm just like, oh, I can't make it. Oh, I'm so sorry, I won't be able to hand this in right now. And so finally someone calls me, and they're like, Tameeka, what is wrong with you? Close the computer, you're in labor. And so, just being allowed to kind of give yourself that slack, because again, everyone has a different path, everyone has a different journey, but knowing to, allow yourself that space to, succeed, fail, pick yourself up back again, try again.
So there are a lot of great books about this. I've read a bunch of them. And one thing that really stood out is Amory Slaughter's book, excuse me, where, at one point she's talking about female CEOs. Female CEOs are on the rise. There are more and more of them. This is wonderful. We should all be applauding. When you look at female CEOs, though, they typically have a husband who is also a high achiever in their career. You look at the typical male CEO, and they have typically a wife who stays home. And so it's still not quite equal, because there are still burdens of home life if you have children, and that burden falls unfairly on women more than it does on men. And so Amory Slaughter's book is advocating for sort of a cultural revolution for men. Essentially, how do we make it more acceptable in our culture for men to take the lead parent role? And maybe that's stay home, but maybe it's just a lead parent role. Who's the first person who gets called from your kid's school if someone's sick? You've probably heard me say this 10 times. I'm obviously ready to go home. I'm on the 8th day of a trip. I've been traveling a lot of different places. I've got 3 kids. My husband is still working a full-time job, but he's also really holding down the fort at home with them. I'm very fortunate that he has the willingness, and he's such a great partner that he will be the lead parent. Not even, to be honest, not just when I'm gone. He's really taking on that role a lot when I'm home too. And he has a community, and we have people around us that support that. But I know that there are a lot of places where women don't have that support necessarily from their partner, and in a lot of times it's because of the culture around us that doesn't really embrace men taking on that kind of role. So when I think about the struggles we face, I tend to align more with the side of we need a men's revolution where men can also be whatever they want to be, and that might be a parent first, and that's cool, and that's better for us. When it works out for the two, obviously. But.
I just have a quick story because it's just so relevant. So, not too long after my son was born, I got the opportunity to go to Haiti. And before we prepared to go, basically my husband decided that he wanted to change careers and he stopped working. But he decided, you know what, while I figure it out, I'm just going to stay home and take care of Sander. And it was so interesting because I didn't realize it at the time, but he got so much just pressure from people around him, men and women. And it was like, oh, how's daddy daycare? Or, I don't know, oh, my favorite, I don't know how you let your wife go traveling all over the world doing God knows what. Actually, we all know what, but okay. He grew up, he's originally from Trinidad and Tobago, so again, like very machismo culture. And so, yeah, I agree with you. It was super tough. And he purposely, he never really shared it with me, but he also tried not to internalize that just because he disagreed with it. But I didn't realize how much, I was just, it's 2020, why would we still have those attitudes?
On the flip side of that, sorry. On the flip side of that, we also need to not throw ticker tape parades every time they do something that is just basic. You know what I mean? When he takes the kids for a walk, inevitably will have to say, well, mom must be home with a glass of wine and her feet up, as if I had been home all day slaving over the kids and now my husband's freeing me for a few minutes and he gets an award for taking the kids on a walk. So, men need to be able to do the basics without everyone celebrating them.
I once had a faculty member who said that he couldn't come to a meeting because he had to babysit.
Yes.
I was like, oh, that's very nice of you. It turns out it's his own children.
Yes.
I was like, wait a minute, no, that doesn't qualify as babysitting.
I've been known for calling men out for that publicly. You're not babysitting when they're your children.
Yeah.
My mind went to something my grandmother used to say, which is, many will be there for you, some will be there with you, and only a few will save you. And I guess I've been fortunate, and I hear certain tones in her stories about it too, of having a really great network that were helpful along the way, and sometimes I would say saved me in those situations where you have those very difficult decisions to make when you're trying to balance work and family life. And, I'm grateful to have had family like that, but I think at the core you have to not only worry about having it all, you have to worry about being and who is it you want to be in that moment.
Yes.
I remember at a point in my career taking a step back into what felt like to a lot of people a demotion, but it's what I needed to do at that moment for my family. And, it helped me to be it all that I needed to be at that moment.
So there's sort of a theme here of community and, it takes a village. Are there any audience thoughts on this question?
Yeah, it's very interesting because we were talking before about working women, go on that maternity and not think about it. And I was thinking, so one of the issues that I've been dealing with, one of my teammates, she's just come back from maternity leave, and I feel like, I'm trying to be really good and sort of give her all sorts of flexibility, work from home, flex a little bit her time. And I'm wondering, did I really do the same thing for her male counterpart when he had his 2 babies? And I don't think that I did. So, that sort of discussion helped me too, because, and maybe I really need to be a little bit more strategic about this and also afford everybody, that sort of possibility.
That's cool.
Yeah. So thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's no hope
Yeah,
there.
way in the back.
Yeah, so I had a question. It comes from my own personal experience, but it has more to do with, we talk about sort of work-life balance, and there's this sort of implication that it's concurrent, right? But that it could be sort of over a period of years where some women might decide to step out of the workforce. Actually, I did. I stepped out for 10 years and then came back and was able to really have a very nice re-entry into the career that I had left. But I think that that was somewhat unusual, at least that's what people tell me. And I guess I wonder about, when you think about women making choices and being kind of accepted for whatever path they might choose to take, this idea of re-entry into the workforce after a period of leave for whatever reason, perhaps to take care of their family, how to negotiate that successfully so that it's not such a difficult decision or a hardship for folks to come back into a career path that perhaps they took a break from.
Were there any particular insights from your own re-entry process that you can share?
Oh, sure. So I'm a psychology professor, and I kind of, it's funny, I was resonating to the story that was told. When my first trimester of pregnancy, I got a big federal grant to do a big research project, and it was sort of a mixed blessing. I ended up not being able to take a maternity leave and worked for 3 years, and then at the end of that, when I had my second child, I said, I'm done. I have to take a break. And I took 10 years off of my career. I stepped entirely out of the academic workforce. And then 10 years later, sort of found my way to kind of claw back into a tenure track line and got tenure as a full professor. But it was a process where I had to sort of really let my ego go and do some lower level jobs at first to kind of get my foot back in the door and work my way back into the position that I have now.
I remember taking a leave of absence, and one of the tactics that I used during that period of time was to do some consulting work, just to try to, sort of stay on the curve of what was happening in the field. To try as best at that time to have what I could see as like professional and personal balance, but also that.
Yeah, I know that some companies are actually starting formal reentry programs. I know that where I work as a formal program, that we're hiring a lot of people in different programs where people have absences for several years. Some it might be a couple years, some it's 10 years, and we're expanding it in various areas, and it's been extremely successful.
Agree. We're in a, sorry.
I mean, and we have a lot of re-entry candidates in my specific area.
Yeah, in tech, there's a lot of concern about gender disparity. There's a lot of reasons for that. There are a lot of solutions that are that people are spending a lot of time on. How do we get young women interested in coding? I'm sure this is all familiar to you. There's a lot of efforts on that. But one of the things that we've seen in tech as a trend is how do we get women later in careers to come back in, and how do we do re-entry programs? And that's been part of, I know at Microsoft, but other big tech companies as well, re-entry programs. The area that we are really trying to grow when we look at our diversity inclusion numbers is actually women over 50. Like, that's just an area where we're not well represented in tech, and we want to be. And you don't just create a bunch of new tech employees in that age group, right? You have to find people who've worked in those spaces before and bring them back in to the workforce. So I completely agree. I think it's a culture change, but it's also going to take leadership of these companies to create programs and to recognize it, get away from this unconscious bias when you're looking at gaps in resumes, and people don't realize that they're not picking someone who would be perfect for that job because they're based on what they're usually looking for. So totally concur that there's a role for the companies to play in that.
So speaking of culture, you mentioned culture, Ginny. We've seen a giant culture shift over the last few years with the Me Too movement, of course. And I wonder how we've experienced that in our workplaces and the culture in our workplaces. As women in policy, women in leadership positions, how have you experienced the onset of the Me Too movement and how that affects your everyday life? Does it affect, have your workplaces instituted any policies that are affecting the culture, or is it more implicit? Are you interacting differently in the workplace with people because of this culture change? Or I just wonder what kind of thoughts you have on it. Anybody start? Yeah.
Well, I'll sort of speak to my prior life because just having been back here for 18 months, I'm still figuring out what the culture around here is. but certainly I can say in the community college environment, where I saw a lot more attention was around the experiences of students. With the community college environment not being residential, the emphasis on student services and student support is just different. And I think we began to recognize from a policy perspective that we needed to ensure that there were supportive services for all students beyond those things that were academic, and really trying to understand that being a student for community college students is a small part of their lives. We tend to think of student and you think that's all they are. But these individuals had families, had other commitments, other interests, other issues going on. And so we made a real investment through some private funds to build wraparound services and additional supports, recognizing that students bring a lot with them to the classroom.
A lot more training videos. Anyone who works at a big company and has to do these training videos is familiar with that.
Online training modules.
I will say, though, that I actually think Microsoft did a very good job addressing it in our standards of business conduct trainings. They do a new one every year. They've actually done a great job. They make them like into mini movies, and you're invested in the characters, and plot lines keep developing. And you're like, is Norman getting fired? I don't know. Like, you're really curious, so everyone watches them right away. But what I think they did a really good job was, you were expecting last year there's going to be a Me Too, scenario, of course. Right. But the one that they brought up was someone noticing a vendor saying something inappropriate to a colleague and reporting it. And it wasn't like, hey, don't sexually harass your colleagues, because I think we all sort of know that. It was more like you have a responsibility if you see something too, or if it's saying like we all have a role in this, even if we're not a direct participant or recipient of this behavior. And I thought that was really clever, because I'm sure a lot of people were dismissive and saying, well, I don't harass anybody, I'm not being harassed, so this doesn't apply to me. And it was a smart way of saying, no, you're involved too. You might see something. You might have authority over someone who did something. Like, you have a role too. I thought that was interesting.
Definitely same as RTI. I don't think it was our video. We have videos, but they're not as engaging.
I gotta get the URLs for this.
By the way, he did not get fired. Shocking. But.
Oh, don't blow it.
But what was interesting is that at RTI started taking a look in general on about their culture and really focusing on inclusivity and creating just more spaces for employees to engage in different areas. Because we are so kind of dispersed, there's a lot of colleagues that I just don't know because our paths don't cross. And so they started employee resource groups, and it coincided around the time. And so I don't think it was as a result of the Me Too movement, but what I did find was that the environment was there because of it. And so and RTI really invested a lot, and it continues to invest a lot in that. And it allowed spaces for so many different employee resource groups, whether it was, Black employee resource group, Latino, women advancing leadership group, veterans. And so that was something. But what I found was interesting was that our business environment changed, in that there was an increased emphasis on gender and the role of gender in projects. And so naturally, RTI, we always had some sort of gender component in a lot of the work that we did, particularly when you're working in governance and economic development. In developing countries, when you're looking at economic development, gender plays a huge role. And so, but now you find proposals where they're actually calling out, like, okay, so please call out the role of gender in your project. You have people that will create, like, we have a gender specialist, and kind of, so that's been interesting to see as well. And so, but you could always tell the implementers that always kind of had that as a tenet, and those that are kind of just getting hip to the trend. Yeah.
Adding it on.
Yeah. I think one that we're still kind of working through are microaggressions, really thinking about those microaggressions. And I am what I call like a extroverted introvert. And so in certain situations, I've always been taught to just kind of not speak up for yourself. And I do have a couple of colleagues that would have a tendency to cut me off or even like acknowledge everyone. Like, for example, I'm part of a senior management team, and they would name everyone except for me, like just little things like that. And I remember one time I had a meeting and it happened, and I said, sorry, I'm reclaiming my time. And then I started again. Because, yeah, I was right. It was fresh off of Maxine Moore's, and everyone's like, yeah. And so, but
That's right up there with being in a room, being in a meeting with all men, and saying something, making a point or a suggestion, and then some man 2 comments later making the same point.
And oh, that's an excellent
Great idea.
Yes, exactly. And so what I'm curious to see is, more work in that area, being able to train people to really recognize those microaggressions, and then creating that space where it's okay to have that open dialogue. Because the thing about microaggressions is that sometimes the people don't even realize that they're doing it. And so I think that's something that we can work a little bit more on.
Terry, I've started to actually try to call that out when I see it, right? Not by like saying, but by saying, that's an interesting point, and I heard so and so made that point, same point earlier, right? Yeah. And so, if anybody sort of tricks of the trade of how we can help each other out,
I think that's very important for women to call that, or men to call that out when it happens, because it's just so disrespectful.
Yeah.
Humor goes a long way in doing that, because you can break the tension with a little bit of humor and maybe something else.
Right.
And more times you have to do it on a smaller executive team of 7 people, and I have one guy who does that constantly. So I had 3 nice little conversations with him privately, and after that, there's no more private. We've been in here on a regular basis. Now all the other guys in the room have started chiming in too, going, where'd you do it?
I was in a meeting with a really important customer. I mean, I don't do sales, so customer is a weird word, but someone who was important to me in my job, who was not at our company. And he was talking about setting up another meeting, and he said, I'll have my girl call you. And he's in front of his entire leadership team. And I said, last I checked, this isn't Mad Men. I was like, you can tell Stelfanie to call me. And everybody laughed, and he blushed. But one of the women came up to me later and was like, he does that all the time, but none of us call him out on it because he's the boss. He's a big boss. And it was like, she was like, it was great. You did it. Everyone laughed. It was funny. He will never do that again. Who says that?
I think every day that you work in an organization and do a good job, you're earning your clout. You're earning your political capital. And I would not hesitate, from the beginning to, respectfully raise the issues that you see. But I think that you'll find it doesn't take too long. If you're good at what you do, and people, see that, they'll respect you and they'll want to correct issues that are bothering you because they'll want you to stay. It's sort of the same issue with the woman who wanted to work remotely. I mean, if an employee is valuable, they'll fix it for you.
When I was younger and right out of college, I hung out with the young people that I worked with. And I thought one of my coworkers was weird because she'd go to lunch with this 40-year-old, and I just thought that was so odd. And then I realized she had all these multi-generational friendships and relationships that really served her well in her career. And I learned that too late. I regret it. I didn't know some of the older people that I worked with because I thought I was supposed to hang out with the young people. So build those relationships.
Definitely.
Because it doesn't actually matter where they are in the hierarchy of the company either. Just if you're in the lunchroom, if you're getting water, if you're going for coffee, don't always exclude it just to your in-group. Think broader, because that will be huge for you. And that's actually how those more natural mentorship relationships come about. It's kind of awkward to be like, will you be my mentor? I mean, sometimes that works. It depends on the structure of your company. But sometimes they're more natural relationships that you build just because you get to know them, you show an interest in them.
Guys, this has been a fascinating conversation. I will summarize it in 3 brief points. The first one being that what I really heard was that not at work, but on the home front in your life in general, it takes a village and takes a network. At work, we've got to lean on each other and back each other up. And then lastly, humor. Dare we say joy is just crucial. And thank you to our panelists very much.